Right. Can someone say something so that I can test my speaker?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Hi everyone, welcome to the June 29th Agent Sandbox meeting. We have announcements and discussion topic today. And the first announcement is that we have the 0.5.0 release available. So you can go and check out the release page to see what's being shipped. So basically the biggest feature is that we are graduating the API to V1 Beta 1. So for those who are new to Kubernetes, V1 Beta 1 means that the API is stable. That means we are not going to introduce breaking changes going forward. And unless we introduce new API versions. So and that means we made a few breaking changes when upgrading from V1 Alpha 1 to V1 Beta 1. So please be mindful of the changes that we document here. And then we also have an API migration guide for how to migrate. And I'm going to quickly share the migration guide. So basically there are two phases. And the first phase is that you need to run the script so that it will help you change your existing cold start claims to point to a wormhole instead of a template, instead of a sandbox template. But if you don't have that, you don't have cold start claims in your cluster, then you don't need it. And then step two is to just migrate all the resources in etcd from V1 Alpha 1 to V1 Beta 1. So if you don't do it, and there's no breaking changes yet, but when we drop the V1 Alpha 1 support later, and likely in the next release, then this needs to happen. Otherwise, the controller will not be able to recognize the V1 Alpha 1 object in etcd. But then also note that because we changed the stored version of the CRD from V1 Alpha 1 to V1 Beta 1, that means if you make any update to the object in the cluster, it's going to be stored as V1 Beta 1 in etcd. So over time, the impact will be small, but it's still recommended to run this script. And then we also have some other great features. We have some improvement in the performance as well, and perhaps folks can read the release notes. It's quite long. There's also some security enhancements, and that's the announcement today. And then the discussion topic, we have two topics. The first one is about the auto suspension resume feature request. I linked it here as well. And actually, let me share the mini notes in the chat so that folks can quickly reference that. So basically, that feature request, and this is pretty short. Basically, the idea is that we want to be able to automatically suspending inactive sandboxes, which could happen when you're running AI agents when it's not, or tools when it's not taking any more user requests. It becomes inactive, and to save resources, you might want to suspending it. And for now, you have to do that manually, and we're thinking about a way to trigger that automatically. And this is also part of the roadmap and mentioned in the README. So we have I have a cap opening for this, but I think I want to change that. Basically, the idea is that we want to potentially we already have a Sandbox router which is shipped as part of the Python SDK. That's for routing traffic to each individual sandbox. And I'm thinking that we can have a way to um, detect the the sandbox is not active and then move it to suspension. It could be either auto detected by the system by looking at the traffic going into the sandbox, or it can be triggered by the sandbox itself. And maybe we can have a have the sandbox um, trigger that, or we have a sidecar that does the auto pausing. And then when resuming, the router can take uh, incoming request and figure out, oh, that sandbox is actually currently being suspended. Then it can trigger a wake up um, operation so that the sandbox will be wake up. But we still have some things to be fleshed out. For example, the current suspension and resume is pretty simple. It only does pod scale down and scale up, which is related to the, I think it's related to the second agenda item, which is about uh, the suspension and resume and snapshot integration as well. So for now, when it resumes, it doesn't have integration with things like snapshot class, so that you can only resume with something like, oh, the original volume you have for this sandbox. But then everything else is not fully integrated unless you're using the Python SDK. So that it needs to be um, implemented as well. And then there's also some discussion about soft pausing. So, for example, instead of just turning down or shutting down the pod, you scale down the pod vertically so that it's smaller, doesn't take too much resource. There's also some upstream um, cap in Kubernetes about having something called shell pod so that it doesn't take much resource, but then when you resume, it's going to it can be resumed faster, much faster than requiring to start that pod again. So maybe I can hear like feedback from the community about this feature request and how do people think that the pausing and resuming should be detected and triggered in their use cases. So feel free to raise a hand or say anything about what you observe or what you're currently using.
Or if there are any concerns around the direction that we're headed with these two changes. Brandon.
Yeah, I love the direction of this. I think we've heard pretty consistently some folks in the community, certainly customers we've been working with, are asking for a bit more clarity around lifecycle management. I do wonder if this is like an and instead of an or. And you mentioned wanted to do sort of initialization of the suspend from within the sandbox, and then also at the router. Given the direction of all these projects like OpenClaw and Hermes and a number of others, I wonder if we're going to have multiple interfaces in order to support suspend and resume for various frameworks.
So I think if we let the controller detect whether the traffic is going in and out to the sandbox, then it will be generic, applies to all different types of applications. So I was also initially I was thinking about maybe the sandbox can tell the system that it needs to pause and it needs to resume. But then I'm also thinking about the security part, which is that we should assume that every sandbox is not is running something that we don't trust. So pausing is probably fine, but for resuming, we need better protection around that so that it doesn't DDoS the system. There's a comment from Aditya about
Me and Shruti chatting with each other.
Yeah. Yes, it needs to be pluggable.
I mean, I'd love to know what others in the community think. I mean, it feels like the suspend action and resume action are sort of two somewhat discrete CUJs. On the suspend, I can certainly imagine a scenario in which the workload itself emits a signal that, hey, I'm idle. I can be suspended. It'll probably be difficult to detect that just with CPU utilization, other things like that. But I can certainly imagine a scenario in which there's like a more explicit event that's emitted. And similarly, like if there's a rule that says, okay, if we haven't received any inbound traffic via the router for X amount of time, like we could also use that as a signal. And it'd be really interesting to also like be able to combine those signals, right? To be able to say, okay, I want to create a rule that says if there's no inbound traffic and there's an emit signal, then like, okay, we can safely suspend this, or maybe we just need one of those two signals. Maybe there's a third. I don't know, but like those are pretty obvious ones on the suspend side. On the resume side, that one feels a little bit different, right? We probably want. Maybe we can make some other assumptions around like waking up the runtime for the agent. It's probably a pretty safe bet that there would be some kind of API invocation that would go through the router, HTTP or RPC. But I'd love to hear feedback from others, like whether they expect another action to trigger the resume.
Yeah, plus one. Like we'd love to hear if others have opinions or feedback over here, because Brandon, Janet, me, and Shruti, we can talk or chat regularly. We'd love to get more input from the community if there is any, or if you're liking the direction that we're in. Perfect.
I think, as I wrote in the chat, I don't fully get how the controller or a separate controller will do this, but I think the router or SDK approach, and maybe SDK approach, is a good one. I don't have a specific use case, but I was just thinking it will make a lot of sense.
Yeah, basically, if the traffic goes through the router, it can we can use that to detect whether there's any traffic going into each sandbox. James?
Yeah, hi everyone. I have not joined yet, so nice to meet you all. I've been working on something very similar for OpenWebUI, and I had followed a pretty similar approach. I basically have my own operator. I had just found Agent Sandbox, and I'm looking at the similarities. But for the way we self-implemented it, we did kind of like an idle reaper, which I think sounds pretty similar. Basically, our terminal CRD object just puts a inactivity like number, and there is part of the operator that watches for that. And when there's no network connectivity or any action occurring within the terminal pod itself, that all contributes to the idle timer growing. So I think something similar for suspend definitely makes sense. For recreation or for resume, that was something we were kind of struggling with too, because I think for us, we were actually deleting the pod and basically just recreating it on resumption. And we were just using PVCs to make sure that things were kept consistent when the terminal instance came back up. So I think as long as there is persistence, the mechanic around how you resume is not as important, but we had not gotten to thinking about the security considerations and things like that either. But all of that is to say, it seems like the direction you're going is very similar to where we were going, and it sounds good to me.
That's great to hear, James. The Reaper pattern you actually mentioned, it's funny you mentioned it. I heard a similar pattern from another customer I've been working with as well. So it's interesting. We'll have to find a slightly different word than Reaper. Sleeper, maybe, I don't know. I'll come up with something more clever. But I think there's something to the pattern of basically just marking resources as eligible to be suspended and then having a separate decoupled process for doing the suspension. Maybe it'll have to be Sandman or something. We'll have to come up with a more clever
good.
putting sandboxes to sleep kind of term.
Sandman is good. Yes. I don't know if anyone's read the novel, the comic.
So I also just noticed that I just learned that there's a component in Knative, and it's called Activator. It has the ability to handle scale to 0, and then when there's traffic coming in, it can signal the autoscaler to trigger, which seems very similar to our use case, which is we want to scale to 0 and then being able to trigger wake up when the request is buffered. So maybe we can learn something from that architecture or how it's implemented. So I want to, I saw that Lior is on the call. So Lior is from the networking side. Maybe do you have some pattern that you see similar to this that's implemented in the SIG networking?
For the suspend resume?
Yeah.
I don't see any pattern specifically for the suspend resume right now within our side, but like specifically in agentic networking. So no one had brought up this case yet. But we're still more on the egress controls and where the governance should be enforced. But I think the moment like there is a decision there, like how exactly this should be, then the same proxy can probably be used to help with the suspend resume operations, skip requests, stuff like that. Not sure if this is helpful, but
thinks.
I'm curious if there's anything valuable, maybe I'm just kind of shooting in the dark here, but if there's anything valuable like in the Envoy community or others that have sort of handled I have an inbound request for a resource that doesn't yet exist. The use case seems relatively common, I would think, especially for like scale to zero kind of things. So maybe there's some other communities we can also draw some resources from, or draw some inspiration from it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure it has been there's some solutions built on Envoy for this type of problem actually. So
Yeah.
I can link if that's interesting.
Yeah, I also think that the sandbox router we have in the repo is going to be simple. So it's not going to be enterprise scale. So perhaps we need some additional document or enhancement about how to use Envoy with Agent Sandbox.
The Sandbox router right now, where does it run?
It runs as a separate deployment, and it's written in Python, so it's not.
Is it shared across sandboxes though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, what you're bringing up is like it's a good use case for, so in agentic networking, we also have a centralized deployment. It's based on Envoy, spinning up. If you deploy a gateway, it is spun up, where you also can do some policies based on MCP and stuff like that. But kind of looking into the same Envoy deployment and leveraging the abilities to kind of hold the inbound requests for resources and do them is definitely possible. I mean, I am familiar with some projects that are doing it based on Envoy. I can go back to the agenda and link some stuff, or we can create an issue and try to work on that if that's useful. But yeah, maybe this sandbox router can be kind of a plug and play thing, and people can do this simple thing, or they can go and do something a little more networking on like network feature rich, like Envoy or stuff like that.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. So right now the sandbox router is not part of the release. It's a completely separate component that we ship in the Python SDK doc. So basically users need to build it themselves and deploy that themselves with Agent Sandbox. So I think a better integration is with a more enterprise ready product is likely better.
Right. So the way I see this right now is like it's definitely another step in a direction where like that's the takeaway I'm getting from here is that basically, if you have something that's capable for doing this L7 enforcement, that the other issue I open to it would also be able to do to hold these requests. Like there's no reason it will basically be handled in different deployments or proxies. So we can track them together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sounds good. And like Aditya mentioned in the chat, we have a separate PR for changing the sandbox router to Go, so that will help with the scalability and make it more efficient. But I think, yeah, the integration with something like Envoy is still why not Rust? Yeah.
Guys, I have a question. I've been following this for like a few weeks. So, I mean, I did not understand, is it supposed to be like an extension of a stateful set or something like that? Or like the sandbox itself, or is it around that? I'm actually trying to understand the project. So,
Yeah, so the project is mainly around orchestrating sandboxes. So it's like deployment or a stateful set. We package the common pattern that's used in AI agents, and then put it in the repo. So basically, for the sandboxing part, we are relying on the container runtime for better isolation. And on top of that, we have several orchestration layers for things like how do you create a warm pool of sandboxes and quickly start a sandbox out of a warm pool, um, and then also some additional things like what do you want in a sandbox. So for now, you can have a service, we can have a VPC and a pod with
Mhm.
a sandbox, and then we're also introducing more features. There's also a router for you to route traffic to the sandbox instead of um, having to connect to each sandbox. And then, like we mentioned, we are going to have auto suspend and resume support. There's also a Python SDK and Go SDK for
Mhm.
connecting with for controlling the sandbox, interacting with it.
Right. So ideally in a direction of basically something which is independent, like on its own, but orchestrated like a deployment or a stateful set, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All right. I think we're at time, but if folks have feedback or comments, feel free to update the meeting notes or send a message on the Slack channel or mailing list, CGAP's mailing list. Then we can continue discussing how we want to design this. All right. Thanks everyone for coming today. See you.
Hello. I don't get it. Sorry. Uh, I put a list on the second KEP and um, is this not on the topic?
Yeah, we just mentioned that. This
Uh,
one, right?
yeah, I'm a bit confused because this PR has been opening for a while. So I don't see any active development discussion or anything on that. Is that abandoned or what? How do we move forward? Or
I think we're still working on that.
what's the best way to move this forward? Because I haven't seen any action there, so I was confused.
Let's continue the discussion in the CAP. I think we were focusing on moving everything to V1 Beta 1.
I see.
Yeah.
But this one could be another breaking change.
No, new API fields will not be breaking. Only changing existing
Sure.
fields will be breaking.
Kind of depends on how this CAP go forward, right?
Yeah.
That's why I was confused. Like this CAP is not merged, so it's not guaranteed that there will be no breaking change. I mean, current CAP itself probably doesn't introduce any, but since this CAP is still open and it's not been working on for a while. I'm just curious or wondering, and including the 6.9.6.8, which seems to be also a pretty big topic. What's the best way to move forward? Because the comments on that cap was not really addressed or answered for a while. So same thing for 9.6.8. Is it better to do it on the Agent Sandbox Slack channel to move fast?
Yeah, we can continue the discussion there or in the PR. I don't think we're going to introduce more breaking changes, given that we already shipped V1 Beta 1. we cannot do that without introducing the V1 beta 2. So any design will be on taking the backward compatibility into consideration.
Sounds to me it's like reversed, but
basically, let's continue the discussion in Slack or in this PR because we're already at time.
okay, sure.
All right. See you, everyone.